What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to go over a slightly depressing article here. I sometimes go on the hunt and I type in, a couple of my key websites that I check out and, see what they got to offer. If anything I'm, missing on Twitter. You don't get everything from Twitter. And this one was actually a pretty interesting read. It's pretty short, and granted, it's off of a different article. So what we have here, this comes from PlayStation Universe, and the title, 2024 will be the year of closures, game industry leaders warn after 2023's unending layoffs. And it came from Games Industry Biz. So let's just read a couple snippets. Again, this PlayStation Universe one is not all that long, and then we'll talk about my opinion. If 2023 was the year of layoffs, 2024 will be the year of closures, one CEO told them. And this is based off of multiple leaders in the games industry, heads of publishers, developers, and investment in games. They spoke out. So quite the group, I guess, they got there. Not just developers, but publishers, media, service companies. There are just too many unprofitable businesses in games. We're looking at up to 2 years of pain. A dire scene for what has been for years the biggest entertainment industry in the world. Games are an intersection between technology and entertainment like no other creative medium. In so many ways, the games industry is one of the largest industries in the world, yet no one working on games seems to be able to hold a job unless you're, of course, a C-suite executive. A publishing head blamed it on far too many projects getting the green light towards the end of the pandemic and an oversaturation of games in the market. Too many games were greenlit in 2020 and 2021. We need to get to pre-pandemic levels in terms of the release schedule, and that's probably going to take 2 years. You can already see publishers signing fewer games. That's happening everywhere. The stores are saturated, not just Steam, and the games just aren't delivering the levels they were. In related news just last week, Square Enix talked about how it will be slimming its focus down, releasing less games at hopefully a higher quality. A different publishing head said the effects of, left any engagement-based industry spread too thin, no one being able to deliver on everything they're doing. Despite this, these leaders all agree that the games industry is putting on a good face. Last year for the average player was an amazing year. So many amazing games came out last year. As one studio head in the report put it, the games industry is in an odd place right now, but to those on the outside, it doesn't look that way. They also cautioned this won't last forever. The games industry isn't going away anytime soon, and there will be an upswing. The games business is built on very solid foundations, and when things start to grow again, we would hope to see a more sustainable and wiser industry emerge on the other side. So quite an interesting read. Honestly, PlayStation Universe, well, as you would assume, PlayStation website, and sometimes they just hit with, kind of oddball things like this. Very, very good. But again, very interesting article that they got there. So let's talk about it a bit. I would like to say one thing. So I read this once on my own, and then I double read it for you guys. And I guess I got to remember, and maybe we all have to remember, so this is the opinion of these higher ups. So there is some truth to it, definitely. I'm sure they have stats and facts that we probably don't even know, about, right? That they kind of keep these numbers almost hidden. But also, they do see things in kind of skewed ways. They might say, well, why is the industry struggling? Well, it's because of this and this. And that's their opinion. Now, they hold the keys. They have the money. They are the decision makers, right? So their opinion, it does matter. You can't say, well, these are these business executives, right? What do they know? You could say, what do they know? But it doesn't really matter what they know. They know what they think they need to know, and they hold a lot of power. So I definitely do think that's important. Now, what I think they say, I think generally, there's a lot of truth to it. I think you do have a lot of games. I think you have a lot of issues that have risen up ever since the back in 2020. In fact, we talked about this with the Xbox situation. It's like, okay, well, why do you fire or lay off so many people? And we talked about multiple issues. And in that video, I think it's more than one thing. I think what's going on negatively in the gaming industry is more than one issue. When Insomniac was hacked, right, we talked a lot about ballooning budgets. And obviously they were singled out with that, and maybe wrongly so considering, the hack in that situation. But it is a valid, criticism. It is a real thing. Sean Layden warned about it, right, years ago. And it's not just Insomniac. It's not just Sony. It's across the industry. They're spending too much money on games. Now, why? I don't really know why, right? It could be management situation. It could be whatever it might be. Games are taking too long and they're getting too big. So again, is there some truth to the reasoning that these people said in the article? I think there is. And even if you disagree with some of it, which is totally fine, ultimately it's like, well, shucks. These are people that hold a lot of power. As the beginning said, these are heads. These are publishers. These are heads of development teams. Like these are people that are giving predictions for sure, but I honestly think they're right. And that is very sad, because you think of 2023, you had so many layoffs. Now, I did say my prediction, like, I do think 2024 is going to be much worse. I think it might be double or triple because, I will say this. The headline, I don't even know if it really makes sense. Like, if last year was layoffs, this year would be closures. I guess those are definitely different things, but by closing studios, you are also laying people off. You know what I mean? So it's kind of the same thing, but it's a more extreme version. Because at least last year, you say, okay, you trim a studio by 20, 30%. Well, that's still awful, by the way. But you don't close the studio. The studio's not dead and doesn't exist anymore. Now the studio is going to not exist and be dead, right? So it is definitely a level higher up this time. And again, like I said, I do think it's going to get worse. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I guess the end of that article does show some signs of hope. And actually, if there's anything that I agree with these people on, it's actually towards the end where they say, the foundation of gaming is well built. That's very important to me. Now, I think a lot of these, even like a Hollywood, right? A lot of these things are built on very solid, whether it's principles or foundations or whatever, creativity, escapism, this art form that has been around for, well, not as long as actually other art forms for sure, right? Gaming is one of the newer ones in the grand scheme of things, but it's very, very impactful. And I think what you're probably going to get from gaming that people are already kind of noticing is you're just going to get some, I guess, spreading outness. There's no real, I guess, great way of saying it. I guess what I mean by that, every couple of weeks it almost seems like, but let's say maybe every couple of months, you hear about this new studio that pops up from existing talent, right? So some big name at EA, right? They made a couple of really big games like a Mass Effect, and then they leave and they start their own company and they got 50, 75, 100 people. We just had Rocksteady, right? So the co-creators, they left and they are starting their own studio. They got like 25, 30 people. They want to build it up. That's obviously you have the indie scene, right? Indies are very, very important in gaming. They're going to continue, and they actually might be more important because gaming, as we've talked about, I think one of the biggest problems, especially when you look at these layoffs and the ballooning budgets, right, is exactly that. One of the biggest issues, I don't know if it's the number one issue, but definitely up there, is the money being spent on it. The profits are shrinking between the budgets and then how much that they make, right? Like that net income is shrinking. And the only way you really solve that is by making, well, smaller games and smaller teams. Because I never want to throw the employees under the bus because ultimately they're doing their jobs. They're in it to make, at least I hope, they're in it to make games. They're in it to make fun games. They're looking for, that connection with people. Probably some of them don't do that, but I think a lot of them do. But ultimately, well, what costs so much with these games? Why does Insomniac, why does it take almost $300 million to make Spider-Man? Well, there's more than just employees, but you think about it, and you have hundreds of employees over 5-6 years to make a game. That is like 70-80% of your entire budget is paying the workers. Now, I'm not saying fire them. In fact, I would say maybe split them up. Maybe smaller games, smaller teams, and then for the teams that are so big right now, just split them up. Have 5 or 6 different. You know what I mean? I'm not in it to eliminate these really big studios, but I think that's a big part of the future. And I bring in all these, the talents from a studio that leave and they kind of create their own thing. I really think that kind of is the future. Not entirely the future. There will always be the Sony and the Microsofts of the world. But I think you need that big. You need the big studios. You need the middle tier studios, the ones that have 70 to 100 or 150 employees, right? Not the ones that have, tens of thousands. Again, that's the bigger tier. Middle tier is, maybe less than 150. And then you have the smaller tier, the indies of the world that are maybe 50 or less, right? That's really what you need to establish, and you can't make them all the same thing. You can't keep trying to transform, and I think this is what largely has happened. all of these studios have to be the third tier, the highest tier. They all have to be that in like this modern gaming movement, right? Because you're always looking for the biggest things and these massive games, or games that not just big, not just these open world games, but what about live service games? Well, either games have to be 500 hours at launch, or they have to also still be 500 hours, but it's live service, so it's spread out amongst like 5 years, right? You have to keep the game running. Either way, that's a lot of people. You can't do that with 50 people. I mean, you could maybe, but you're also definitely not making any future games because you have to have your full support. And we've heard this from, say, the Naughty Dogs of the world, right? I actually believe them, at least partly, when they say, hey, the Last of Us multiplayer, if we were to do that and do it right, or do it how you need to do these live service games, the whole studio suddenly becomes a live service team. That part I buy it. I buy it entirely because that is true. You can't be working on 3-4 different games if you're trying to legitimately keep alive. So, again, we're going down kind of just one path here. The bigger issue is, well, there's a lot of issues in the gaming industry. And I haven't said this, I guess, yet, but I've said in pretty much every video we've talked about these layoffs and stuff. Like, I don't want these people, to lose their jobs. I've talked about just the kind of humanity behind it. Look, people sometimes do terrible stuff, or they're not actually in it for the right reasons, or they kind of like have it coming in that way. Those people I'm less, caring, I guess, about. But, there's a lot of people, again, that are just trying to survive. They just, food, a couple luxuries, maybe, get their vacation every now and then, have a roof over their head. I mean, I do care about these people. I want them to be okay. And then also from the consumer, I guess, standpoint too, we want games. We want this medium of entertainment to continue. And, again, the ending is important because gaming is very strong. And I think even if things very much crash, which a lot of people are predicting, like a gaming crash. Well, what does that mean? Well, it does mean a lot of pain. It does mean, I think, studios closing. It does mean people being laid off. But it doesn't mean like gaming goes away. It means that maybe if you have 45 amazing games a year, that's very subjective. That's like me, because the last 2 years, actually, I think I've played roughly 40 to 50 games, almost the same number 2 times back to back. Maybe instead of 45 games, I'll get like 28. You know what I mean? So, that might happen. And that middle part to it, the slimming down, Square Enix slimming down and doing kind of a more focus on just the things they believe are going to succeed a little bit more. I think that's smart. And I think that Square Enix, kind of needs to do that in the situation they're in. Again, I feel like there's a lot of risk there. And I guess I say that because if your solution to these problems, if you're any of these guys, not just Square Enix, if you're any of them and you say, okay, well, all of these issues, we got like 6-7 issues plaguing the industry, so our solution is just going to be make less games and focus on kind of the big hitters. Well, like Sony has been doing that really recently. Now they're trying to go into live service, but they've really doubled down on sequels and not so many new IPs, right? The age of the puppeteers and things like that back in the PS3 generation are long gone. They really don't greenlight as many not all, but some. They don't greenlight as many of them. So I guess again, my point is that is a little concerning even from like a Square Enix perspective. It is a solution in part. Like you can fix some of these issues at least a little bit with that because you're kind of being smarter, right? You're not going to take massive risks, but then you kind of go stale. It's a potential that you go stale because you're just going to work on the same, say, 3, 4, 5 franchises. Now, I like, their main franchises. Kingdom Hearts, give me a lot of them. Final Fantasy, give me a lot of them. Right? Maybe bring Life is Strange back. So I think in some ways that works, but it's not because there's like 6 different problems. It's maybe a solution to 1 or 2 of them. You know what I mean? But it's not necessarily a solution to the budget things because Final Fantasy will still cost a lot of money. What about making things a little bit smaller, having smaller games? And again, it's one company, it's one kind of situation we're talking about. But again, it's not going to be great. 2024, I really, it's going to be hopefully a pretty solid year for the games themselves, just like 2023 was an awesome year. One of the better years in recent memory for video games. Also had some of the worst video games in recent memory, Kong and, Gollum and all that stuff. So overall, definitely net positive. But, with the layoffs and all that stuff, it was pretty bad. I guess one final thing I want to say, oftentimes they'll take jabs at the gaming journalists of the world. They have it coming, at least some of them. And in the beginning, right, the beginning of that article, not just companies. Some of the it makes it sound like too like maybe some contracting, the companies that handle different things that are maybe more behind the scenes than you think. But also, I feel like they're talking about the gaming sector in general. And well, what is part of the gaming sector is the journalism, side to it. They say in this article there's a lot of companies that have been losing money. Like every year they come out and they have a net like loss. They don't have a positive operating income. And I believe that there's absolutely companies out there that are just losing money every single quarter, every single year. And because of situations a little while ago, they were able to kind of ride it out, and they really can't ride it out anymore, right? So, in a way, that's bad management. That really goes back to what we said, a few days ago. Should the workers be punished? No. Are they? Yes. And they always will. You know what I mean? Like we ultimately are this like middle class kind of. Well, I'm part of the middle class, I guess, but we're all part of this, or they are at least are part of this in the game development sphere. And again, they do their work, they try their best, and ultimately, well, if companies are on negative income for like 5 years. Do some employees maybe, are they the cause of it? I'm sure maybe some of them are part of the cause of it, but also it's bad management, right? You can't do that. So they will eventually face consequences, and that's what it sounds like is going to happen this year. But back to the game journalism thing, what also operates on losses every single year, every single quarter? A lot of gaming journalist sites. A lot. We know for a fact. I love to, jab this one in particular, Kotaku. Every few months, they do one really good news story. Okay, got to give it to them. They do some really good work, maybe once every like 2 or 3 months. Generally, they are absolutely awful. Everybody kind of knows it. The game industry has turned on them. Gaming developers have turned on them. Each other have turned on each other. So what I'm getting at here, Kotaku constantly is losing money. Kotaku's value has, just gone. It's literally evaporated into thin air from when they were bought originally to now, right? They don't have value. They, for whatever reason, have managed to survive, at least to some degree, the last little while. Is them, that kind of situation, is that what the article is talking about as well? I honestly believe it is. I feel like things in the gaming industry, and again, like right or wrong, some of these things you might do like a fist pump and say, yeah, finally. Some of them you might be, severely, upset about or mad about. But I do think this is a year where a lot of these companies that have been floating in the negatives and just kind of like survive somehow, they're not going to be surviving, anymore. And again, the causes of it, we've talked about it. Like, it's not so black and white. You know what I mean? There's a lot of nuance to it. And ultimately, I just hope we get through it. Like I said multiple times, like, I don't want people starving. I don't want people, like, losing, where they live and stuff. I want these people to be okay. And I want things to kind of fix itself. Now, there's not much that I can do. We kind of just have to ride it out. Things do, genuinely, this year is going to probably be awful. More awful. If you thought last year was awful, then think of like the next word that's lower than it, right? Because it's going to be worse. It's going to be much worse than last year. But, again, there's some positivity in the article. And if the prediction is 2 years, I guess the question is this year one or was last year one? Because last year was pretty terrible. So like, is last year one, this is year two, and the next year is like a rebound year? Or is this year one, last year was like the prequel series to it, and then next year is the sequel, and then you're done. There is no, trilogy to it. I don't know. I don't actually know, what their prediction is there. I hope it's only this year. And I kind of predicted that. I think this is going to be the worst year, especially if you have studio closures, right? If you close a bunch of different companies this year, there's really nowhere to go but up, because you kind of, right or wrong, you trim a lot of fat. You trim as much fat as humanly possible, even though a lot of it is not actually fat. You know what I mean? Like, they look at it as expendable and they could get rid of it. Some of it maybe, some of it probably not. You can only shrink it so much before you've reached like your core, before the core is revealed and that's all you got left. I think this is the year of doing that. I think this is the year of trimming it as much as you can and just getting down to the bare bones. And then next year is like, okay, can we start to expand again? Can these studios start hiring, and can we grow? And I hope and assume and think next year would be that year. So we'll monitor it. We'll talk about it. I love these kind of videos. The longer, kind of more, nuanced conversations. I really enjoy it. Hopefully you guys did too. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel. Bell icon turned on. And I hope to see you all on the next one.